The next theory of cognitive theories is the job characteristics model. And in the job characteristics model, what it's trying to get at is how do we design jobs, right, to create meaningful work for people. And so we start with the far left-hand column where it's called core job dimensions, and you've got a box in pink, a box in green, and then a box in yellow. And the green one, if you can't read it, it says autonomy on it. And so those in those categories, the pink ones, the variety, the identity, and the significance. The goal, of course, is we want as much variety, task identity, which means I can do an identifiable task. And we want as much significance as possible, where basically I'm going, yes, this is really important. This is how it's important. This is why it fits into the big picture. If I know that I've got a variety of things to do that is really identifiable and is meaningful, right? Is the has some significance to me, then I experience greater meaningfulness at work. So, can you still feel meaningful work if you don't have variety? Sure. It'll be lower, but it'll still be there. This is an additive function, not a multiplicative function like the previous theory was, the expectancy theory. And then autonomy, which is the one in dark green, and autonomy, high levels of autonomy, can result in experienced responsibility. So if you want responsibility on the job, they need to create a job that gives people some autonomy in being able to exercise what they do. So autonomy results in greater senses of responsibility. And then feedback, right? People need to know how well they're doing. So I need to know whether or not I'm doing well, and I need to know when I'm doing the job that I'm getting feedback automatically from the job that something's working or not working. And if I'm able to do that, that's great. If I'm not, then at least as the manager, it's my job to give people feedback to let them know they did well or they didn't do well. If you don't tell them that they're doing well and you only tell them that they're doing something wrong, that can also have a negative impact on motivation. So when we have high variety, high identity, high significance, high levels of autonomy and feedback, we have these wonderful psychological states that ultimately result in greater internal work motivation, greater performance, greater satisfaction, and lower absenteeism and turnover because people will be more engaged with their job. They will like it, they'll care about it, and they will want to do whatever it takes to do a good job. And those are the outcomes that we want. So these things can have an impact on great intrinsic motivation when we have things like autonomy and then also mastery, which we won't get into right now, and then purpose. So we need to have the purpose, we need to know what our responsibility is, and we need to have the skills to do it. And that gives us that high level of motivation. The last cognitive theory we're going to get into is equity theory. And basically, it's how does this concept of fairness and what is fair drive people to behave in certain ways? So think about it this way. I put forth a certain amount of effort and I expect a certain reward. And if the person next to me puts forth the same effort, they should get the same reward. And this is a principle for, right, the Equal Pay Act, right? If we're doing the same job, we should be paid the same money because that is what's fair and equitable in that sense. But if I feel like I'm working harder than the person next to me, I believe I deserve a better reward. So if I'm working harder and the person next to me is not working as hard, or at least in my perception, they're not working as hard, if I find out they're getting the same reward as me or more, I'm going to feel like that's unfair. And this is also principally why a lot of organizations don't want people to talk about their salaries, because they can hide these inequities, which will create problems of motivation in the workplace. And that's a wrong thing to do. People should feel free to be able to speak about their pay and working conditions and all those sorts of things, no questions asked, because if you're doing the right thing, you have nothing to hide. So the next thing is recognizing, right, the difference between my output versus my input, right? I'm doing work and I get a reward. You're doing work and you're getting reward. And there's that comparison between my ratio of output to input. So I'm putting this effort in, I'm getting this reward. And the other, whatever the other is. Well, who is other? Other can be me in the past. Well, in the past when I did this, I got this great reward and now I'm not getting that reward. Why is that? So that's the self in the past. And then it can be I'm sitting next to a coworker, and that coworker is not working as hard as me, and therefore they are not getting paid. They're getting paid more than they should. Um, so that's not fair. Then I could also compare myself to my supervisor, right? And you might say, well, how can you do that if you're doing two different jobs? I can do that because it's a ratio. It's not an objective number, like I'm getting X, so therefore I should get Y. It is a ratio. It's the relationship between my output and my input. My supervisor has more responsibilities than me. Their output is going to be higher, so their reward should be greater, right? That's how that works. And then somebody in another organization. If I see somebody, my best friend works in another company, they do basically the same job I do, they're getting paid way less than me, then of course I'm happy about where I'm working, but that will make me feel good about my efforts, but also will make me feel sad, right? Because my friend's not making as much money as I am. And vice versa, if they're making more than me, that's going to create dissatisfaction and I'm going to want to make more money because of that. So the theory then gets into, so how do people respond, right, to overpayment or underpayment, right? And we tend to not get too worked up about overpayment because who would, right? I'm getting paid more. That's your problem. It's not a me problem. I'm getting what I deserve, right? But in reality, it can result in some behaviors, although oftentimes self-interest doesn't push people to behave in those ways. But let's talk about the underpayment, because that really is the thing that drives most people, is the underpayment. We can have behavioral responses and psychological responses. So let's say I am making less money than my colleague next to me. And so what are some of the options? What can I do? I can exit the company. I can go into my boss and say I deserve more pay. I can slow my work down and say, oh, well, if they're not working as hard as I am and I'm making the same amount of money, why should I work as hard? And so I'm going to decrease my work output to get everything back into proportion again, right? So those are behavioral responses. Psychological responses are things like, oh, I need to rethink this. Maybe I need to just let go and be satisfied with what I have, or maybe I need to rethink. Maybe I'm not working as hard as I think I am, or maybe I am over or underestimating how hard they're working. And so that's the psychological cognitive adjustments that I need to make in my head in order to make it feel like it's fair, where I can be like, yeah, okay, I can walk away from this because clearly this person must be working harder than I know they are working, and that's why they're getting more money. So we make behavioral and psychological adjustments in order for us to feel like we have a system that's fair. Now, fairness is really important, right? Because even 3-year-olds understand this concept of fair. I mean, how many of you have been around a 3-year-old that stamped their feet and screamed and ranted and raved because something wasn't fair? They wanted to play. They wanted more cookies. They wanted to be able to stay up later. It's not fair that their older sibling gets to do it. Well, they're older, so they have different privileges, right? So a 3-year-old has a sense of what is fair or not fair. It is deeply ingrained in human beings, and when we ignore issues of fairness or equity, it creates problems for us. There are a number of different ways to think about equity and what is fair. And we have procedural fairness or justice, distributive fairness or justice, interactional fairness or justice, or informational fairness or informational justice. And so procedural is getting at, is the process fair? So were we held to the same standards? Did we go through the same process? And if we went through the same process, then that feels fair. Or how I was treated during that process, did that feel fair? Then we have distributive, which is the outcome, right? And the way that rewards are distributed. And that kind of ties back to the equity theory when we're talking about my inputs, my outputs versus my inputs. Did I get a fair reward? Was it distributed fairly? Interactional is getting at the fairness or the kindness that we are treated interactionally with others. And if we don't feel like we were treated fairly compared to somebody else, then that creates a behavior change. And then informational, if we believe that the information given to us was done transparently and fairly, then that also results in certain levels of motivation and perceived fairness about things.